Hello, my friends. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Christ and Coffee podcast, bringing the church together one coffee hour at a time. Today, I have Sylvia Puentes joining the program to share her testimony with us. There's a saying in the church, an ounce of testimony is worth more than a ton of theology. And Sylvia has a ministry where she collects testimonies on her podcast, which is called Saved by Grace podcast. If you want to hear other people's testimonies, feel free to tune into her program. But for today, we're going to listen to her story of how Jesus literally shows up and transforms her life. Hey, Sylvia, how's it going? So good to see you.
So good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's great to return the favor after being on your podcast. You were such a gracious host, giving me an opportunity to share my story. And now I would love to return the favor and have people hear how you came to faith. It's quite a dramatic testimony you have, and I think it's a powerful witness to share with the Christ and Coffee audience. So first of all, how are you doing? What's new?
Not much new, just walking the walk and, doing what God has asked me to do. And just, it's an adventure. It's fun. And it's just great.
Yeah. So you have this podcast, but before we talk about it, let's get to the story of how you ended up starting a podcast in the first place. But let's start with your spiritual upbringing. So what was it like growing up? What was your spiritual background?
So I always tell people that I would say I was loosely Catholic. And what I mean by that is that if I had to check a box, like on an application, I would check that I was Catholic. But I never really went to church, not even on, I wasn't even like the Easter churchgoer.
Yeah, not an Easter Christian, a Christmas.
Right. No, I figured like, hey, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this all the way. So I'm not going.
Yeah.
I never really went to church. But I had a sense of the spiritual realm. I started seeing in the spirit when I was 4 years old. So I knew that the spirit realm existed. And I can tell you that I always felt a pull and a tug for something more and something deeper, especially, as I said, I started seeing in the spirit when I was 4. So I knew that there was another realm.
Okay, let's just pause right there because I have 1,000 questions. What do you mean by seeing in the spirit? Like you just saw things that were not what would be in a natural, like what most people see? You'd see extra entities and deities and stuff?
Yes, exactly. So I'll give you an example. I don't know if you recall the movie The Sixth Sense.
Yeah.
And but I could see and I could sense at the age of 4 people who had passed on, and or just I could see certain things around people starting at the age of 4.
So you'd have this sense of spiritual. Would there be people who passed away recently, or people long past, or people you couldn't recognize?
People long past, or people who passed away recently. Give an example. I saw someone was visiting. My mom had some extended family over, and that person's son had passed away years before. And I never knew him. I just knew that she had a son that passed away years before. And I was about 9 years old at this time. And I saw this man following her into the guest room where my mom had set her up to stay those couple of nights that she would be staying in our home, and things like that. And then I would just know things about people that I didn't know how I knew them, but I just knew them.
Okay. So, and then would you say this is just, why do you think you had this ability? Do you think it was just...
I didn't know why I had the ability. And
then what would it be like when you would tell your mom or about like, hey, this is happening? Would you just like shoo you away? Like you're just seeing things, you have a creative imagination?
No. Thankfully, they didn't shoo me away and they didn't think I was crazy. because my mom believed in all of that.
Okay.
And the thing is that I wasn't necessarily seeing angels. I was seeing things that kind of frightened me. And the reason for that is because there was spiritualism and occultism practiced at home.
Okay, let's dive into that. Well, so the cult means your family or someone in your family was dabbling with talking to bad entities, or what do you mean by all that?
Yeah, but you don't realize that they're bad entities. There's a cultural aspect to this.
Okay.
And so it's very normal to go to a witch doctor, a healer, um, and unless you have the revelation of Christ and the Holy Spirit, you don't realize that this is not of God. That these are there's a spirit of divination at play here, and these are actually familiar or demonic spirits. And so, because that door was opened, because my mom believed in these things, and again, out of ignorance, you don't realize that you're actually believing in demonic things.
So
Because
what is your cultural background, and what specific? Because I think witchcraft is one of those things where every country would probably have a different name for it, or each
right,
culture, and it's pretty much just dabbling with something spiritual that's not of God
exactly,
for
right,
like
exactly.
short-term blessing or something like that, right?
For short-term blessing, for protection, for again, what I always say is the enemy doesn't come dressed in a red cape and a pitchfork. And so part of what he believes gives him power and authority in our lives is leading us to believe that he doesn't even exist. Because if we're not aware that that's who we're serving or that's who we're coming into alignment with, we can't come against him.
Right.
And he can create havoc in our lives. So to answer your question, my mom and all of her family is from Puerto Rico. My dad was from Cuba. And so these practices are very common. You can even go to a Catholic church there and talk about, oh, I just saw the spiritualist and I got my cards read, whereas we know that a true believer of Christ knows that that doesn't align with the Holy Spirit.
Okay, so you have this spiritualistic upbringing that your mom dabbled in some sort of occultic practices,
Right.
um, uh, and then so you have a Catholic label on your identity. So
Right.
you just grew up like this, and you saw things, and your mom was like, "That's normal. I also kind of see that. It's not weird. We're used to this sort of practice."
Right.
And then okay, so then what happens? What you become a Christian, a teenager, or you think this is just normative living?
This is normal living.
Okay,
This is normal living. And but as I grew older, and especially after I became a mom, when I became a mom, there was this, as I said, this tug and this pull was always inside of me, always. And I really do know, I really believe that it was Jesus just always pulling me towards him.
okay,
And so when I became a mom, I wanted my children to have a foundation. I did not want for them to feel kind of like I felt like I was drifting, and I didn't want that for them. I wanted to establish a foundation for them. And I would say, I started praying with them, and I would pray. Really, my prayer was the Lord's Prayer, which my grandmother, who was a great woman of faith, a prayer warrior, she was a seer in the spirit. So again, this wasn't abnormal for me to see in the spirit. So
so
she
a seer is someone, from my understanding, is someone who kind of just sees in images and hears from God through like pictures. Because I think the Old Testament phrase is there's prophets and seers are people who kind of just see more on the image side of things, or see into the spiritual realm versus like the whispers people may hear from the Lord or something. Is that correct?
exactly.
Okay.
She could, yeah, she could see, ex- just like you said, she, she could see not only whispers, but she could actually see. She'd have encounters with angels and things like that. So this was like normal talk in my
Okay.
home.
So, and so you're from your grandmother's side, it's like more the positive Christian stuff, and then a generation, it's still spiritual, but then there's dabbling into non-Christian
Yeah.
spirituality.
But and again, what I want to convey is, because this is important. This is where, the word God says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. Like, my mom had no knowledge of the fact that, because guess what? The devil does believe in God, you
Right.
know? And so you hear God mentioned in these practices. You hear God mentioned in this kind of like church or gathering. So it's not that, like, pure ignorance. And again, there's a cultural component to the whole thing. So I have my babies, and I really feel strongly that I want them to have a foundation, something that they can stand on and be grounded in. And I start going to church. I start seeking, and by seeking, it was really just, I was going to church, and I was going to a Catholic church. And to be honest, I don't think it's necessarily about a denomination, but just, I wasn't really feeling anything there, but I just knew that there was something that was pulling me to God. And so I would pray with my babies at night. And I had difficult pregnancies, and my grandmother would pray all the time over my, so I knew I wanted something more for them. But life goes on, and I kind of let go of that. And I continue in the path that I was going, which was searching. And I became a Kabbalist.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It aligned with a lot of the things that I had learned along the way with spirituality, mysticism. And so I would go to the Kabbalah Center in, I believe it's in Midtown, New York. I'd go to the Kabbalah Center once a week. And ultimately, no matter where I went searching, at some point, it just didn't feel right.
So,
You know,
besides Madonna being a Kabbalist and leading workshops, what exactly is it? Is it just like a Jewish mysticism sort of thing, or
that's exactly what they describe it as. It's Jewish mysticism. They call it God, she, and it's all about energy. There's a lot of new age verbiage and, belief. And it's all about the forces and the universe. And again, God is she, and all of that. So yeah, there's a lot of mysticism involved. And at the moment, I kind of like started gravitating towards it because, again, I I knew there was a spirit realm.
right?
That was not a question for me. I knew there was a spirit realm.
And I think that's a very important detail because, especially people coming from non-Western cultures, I think functionally there's just this atheism that just exists.
Right.
So any talk of any spiritism, like from an African country or Puerto Rico, for that example, that there's an automatic assumption that there is nothing spiritual.
Right.
Whether you're a Christian or not, there's that default. So it is interesting how often I kind of notice that sometimes the Christian church could shoo away people who talk about spiritual things, um, even if they're positive or negative. So it's interesting. So this kind of opening of the spiritual world in the in the Kabbalist religion said, okay, they're not going to think that this is weird. This seems to align with my thinking. So you started attending this once a
So
week.
so I started attending once a week and bought every book that they were selling there. And,
Mm-hmm.
like, I was feeling this pull, this attraction to it, because it seemed to resonate with things that I had seen or felt or whatever. So that lasted for a little bit. And then I started going to a yoga studio, but a real yoga studio, like not at your fitness club. This was almost like an ashram. And the instructors were yogis, and it was a mindset, it was a practice, it was a spiritual practice. And to be honest, I started going for the physical aspect. I had injured my back, and I heard that this would help strengthen it. But it quickly became a spiritual thing for me, and again, whatever we create in our space, that's going to affect us.
Okay.
So
So this is another kind of desire for you to connect with something spiritual and physical.
yeah,
So
yeah.
and so you're practicing yogi at this point, and are
I'm
you
a
still doing?
practicing yogi.
Are
Yeah.
you a Kabbalist as well, or you
No,
kind of
no.
dabbled and kind of went away
I'm
from
not
that?
I'm not a Kabbalist. However, it's so
I
funny
mean,
because
during
I'm like,
during this season of the narrative.
yeah. So I'm not a Kabbalist anymore, but I'm not going to the Kabbalah center. But again, there's that spiritual aspect to everything. I'm in the yoga studio, and I get very involved in that. I felt a lot of like peace there and whatever. And I actually become a yoga instructor.
Okay.
And part of that practice and part of that process was actually like discipleship. That's what I would call it. And we had to read from their Bible, which is called the Bhagavad Gita, and live like. And so that went on for about 2 years. And I was teaching, aside from my job as a nurse, I was teaching yoga. And then I continued. And through all through all of this, again, spiritualism was a big thing for me. I would go get my cards read, and
That's like tarot card readings and stuff.
yeah, like tarot card readings.
What is that exactly? I'm kind of
So
ignorant.
so basically, it's a deck of cards. They have all those pictures that, like the moon, the stars, and a woman or whatever. And the person reading your cards is telling you your past, your present, your future, and any question that you may have. And the thing is that they're not necessarily wrong with the information that they're giving you. However, the truth is, and people who go get their cards read most of the time don't realize that there's a deity speaking through the person who's reading the cards. And because they watch you, they examine, like they study you, the person sitting there waiting to receive information. So they give information in part,
So
and so that keeps the person drawn in, because there's like half truths to whatever they're saying. But this person, as believers, when we have the Holy Spirit inside of us, we can hear God's voice. And this is not God's voice that the person is hearing. They're hearing, it's a demonic entity that is speaking into them to give information to the person sitting in front of them.
yeah, I think this is an important point, because I feel like sometimes so we kind of grew up in this, there's something spiritual, and now the door is open with this new age movement, and kind of like everything you just described are some of the new age practices of a reintroduction to some of these spiritual connections. But
Yeah.
just because something's spiritual doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. And I think that's the interesting problem. There's on one end, there's like the atheist personality secularist who's like, there's nothing
Yeah.
spiritual at all. And
Right.
then on the other end, there's this new age movement that's still going on, and anything that's spiritual is viewed as a good thing.
Yeah.
And Christianity is like, if it's not spirituality, it's most likely bad.
It is. And you have light, you have darkness, you have good, you have evil, you have God, you have Satan. And again, what I want to stress is that a lot of people involved in this are completely ignorant. With as much as I was seeing in the spirit when I was starting at the age of 4, and so many things that I saw along the way in my search for there's something missing, there's something more. And I don't seem to grasp hold of that in any of these places, in any of these beliefs that I'm going to. The truth is, like, I saw a lot of things along the way, and as I was going along the way, I'm opening doors to the spirit realm, but not to the God driven spirit realm.
Okay.
And I didn't know that.
Right. Just like your mother didn't know that.
Right. And I'll give you an example. Yoga seems innocent enough, right? There are gyms that offer yoga classes and all of that. And it seems innocent. The reality is, though, that every asana, which is every position in yoga, is actually dedicated to one of their deities. So you're bowing and you're worshiping and you're saluting that deity. And that in doing that, you're opening that door to that realm.
So this is a way of worshiping through body posturing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what would you say for the, because what would you say, you mentioned it kind of earlier that the yoga you're a part of was kind of very spiritual. Is there an innocent version of it where it's just
No,
stretching?
there is
You're
no, no, there isn't, because the problem is that every asana, which is the positions, and the thing is that you the yoga the yoga flows, like when you're in a yoga class, it's already a choreographed, let's say, class. The next position, the next pose that you're going to go into. And the thing is that that's actually your it's a bow, it's a salutation, it's a giving into a worship to that deity.
So even if you don't believe in God and you're doing yoga, you're somehow connecting to these deities?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You don't have to believe in God. The spirit realm is the spirit realm, whether
So
you want to believe or not.
what would you say for people who just need to like stretch their back? Is there other alternatives? Because I feel like
Absolutely.
I
Just
feel
stretch. Don't do the asanas. Just stretch. Just
just go,
stretch.
go see a physical therapist, do stretching
Good.
exercises.
No. Yeah. Or, like, listen, there's tons of ways to stretch where you're not doing it's these particular asanas, like, because these positions again have already been dedicated to these deities. So it's one is called sun salutation, and in Sanskrit it has another name which I can't remember because now it's been some time since I've done yoga. But the sun salutation, and then you're bowing to the moon, and then you're in cat's pose, and then you're in
Downward dog, upward
downward
moon
dog,
warrior.
and upward, right? But it's not a like just happenstance. Every single asana, every position is a giving of yourself to that deity.
Wow. I was more skeptical on all this until I met a friend from India whose dad was a big yogi back in India. And the way he described yoga from his Hindu perspective was kind of what you're describing versus, I don't know, my secular atheist
Right.
friend who does yoga because it makes her feel good. It
Right.
was just interesting how the philosophies.
But no, see, that's it. It's even beyond philosophy. It's going back to what I said. One of the enemy's biggest weapons, so he thinks, is to keep us ignorant to the fact that he even exists, that any of this is even real. I'm just doing yoga. I'm just
Yeah,
stretching.
I'm just stretching.
I'm just strengthening my core. That's it. But you're not. You're opening doors. And not only do we, when we open these doors in the spirit realm, it's not only going to affect us, and I know I'm going like, but you're then going to affect your children.
Okay. And is that what you feel like happened to you with your mom being open to not yoga specifically, but other spiritual practices?
Well, I mean, it affected me because then I practiced it myself. So
Okay.
yes, my mom opened the door, and then I made sure to go all the way through.
Okay.
So I've dabbled, more than dabbled, in all of these practices.
So
And
tarot card reading, yoga, Kabbalah religion,
mhm.
um, practices from the Puerto Rican and Puerto Rican culture? Is it like sangrias or something like that?
Yeah.
Or okay.
Right. You're right.
And then and you're a mom right now. You want them to kind of have a Christian foundation. You're praying the Lord's Prayer. Then then what happens? How do you start?
So what happens is, at this point, I'm very much involved to all of the spiritual practices that I learned at home. Um, and um, and I really start believing that God can't be real. And if he were real, he didn't care about me. And so my husband at the time leaves, leaves, like leaves. And I come home from work, I discover that he's gone, and I call out to God. It was like I knew no, like what else could I do at this point, right? But I called out to God in a challenge. And I very angrily said to God, you know what? If you're real, I'm giving you one opportunity to show up in my life. I said, because where have you been? So what we haven't gotten into is that I had noticed a pattern of some loss, like traumatic loss in my life over and over. And there was this thought that I know came from the enemy, telling me over and over, God doesn't love you because he keeps taking from you. And so I challenged God to show up, and I told him he had one opportunity. And I asked him, have you been on a coffee break all of my life? If you're even real. And now remember, as much as I practice all this spiritualism, I have a grandmother who's a praying warrior, woman of God. Like she would pray, and it was almost as if she was picking up her phone line and there was a direct dial to God. Like you'd see answers to her prayers. You'd see, like, it was just amazing. I was amazed by her faith, and I was amazed by seeing the fruit of her faith in her life. And just this woman always had peace in her life, no matter what. There was abounding love and peace from her. She was like amazing.
Okay, so you have the prayers from your grandmother. You have experienced quite a amount of loss, and your husband leaving is kind of the last straw of
Yeah.
this is enough. God, where
Yeah.
are you? I mean, you said a coffee break. I think that's ironic for the Christ and Coffee podcast. But then what happens? It's just you're just angry at God. You're honest with God. Where are you? So
Yeah.
what happens next?
I'm totally angry. I'm blaming him for everything. Like if he were real, he's not good at all. And I have to say that my oldest brother was a believer. And for 16 years, he shared the gospel with me.
Okay.
He witnessed to me. And I would roll my eyes at him. I'd call him a cuckoo Christian. I'd say like everything you can, and I tried to avoid him whenever possible because his conversations always led to God. And it was, he'd confront me sometimes. Not he'd confront me, but the things that he would share with me, I felt would confront me. And I didn't like that.
Right.
So I would try to avoid him. And I really thought he was delusional. However, I took notice that his life was different. And what I saw in my grandma, I was seeing in my brother. And I was seeing in his marriage, and I was seeing in my sister-in-law, and I was seeing in my niece and my nephew. So there was something undeniable there. And whether I wanted to admit it or not, that's what I had been seeking for. And that's what I was searching for in all of these places and through all of these different practices. And no matter what, this is an important thing. I never got peace from any of these things. Maybe a momentary peace, but never lasting peace.
Right.
So
I think that's important because I've helped a couple of people become Christians out of the New Age movement. And I think the number one descriptor from their conversions would have been that supernatural peace that comes from this form of spirituality. And I'm avoiding all Christianese as they're starting to follow Christ, but that tends to be the language I think is working, because where the Holy Spirit is, there's peace, love, joy, gentleness, kindness.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's important to be more, if someone's more intellectual and secular coming from that background, not to be kind of dismissive of anyone who's talking spirituality on the one end, and then those who have dabbled in spiritual connectivity, is it fruitful? Is it peaceful? Is it a peace that surpasses all understanding, as the scriptures would say? So your quest for dabbling in all these spiritual practices is a sense of peace and wholeness. What would you say was the driving force
A, a
for these
sense,
dabblings?
a sense of peace and of like a grounding, like there's gotta, you know, it was almost like I was always just trying to survive the next thing, and I'm like, this can't be what life is about, again, there was no real peace. And so after I call out to God, I felt this desire to basically drench myself in Him, and I needed to talk to Him all the time. I was praying, I was talking to Him all the time, just very like candidly, like you and I are talking. And I wanted just to listen to worship music and watch testimonies on YouTube. And I'd watch testimonies of people who had encounters with Him. And I'd say, He's got to be real. Like, this has got to be real, because how can all of these people from around the world share like a similar story, but all be wrong, all be delusional?
Right. And
So
this is happening in a crisis moment. Your husband leaves,
yeah,
and
in a crisis moment. Yeah. I mean, I'm in total crisis. I'm beside myself. For the first time in my life, I feel that I don't have the strength to fix myself, because that's another thing. I was so totally self-reliant, life happened, things happened, and I was the one fixing myself, putting myself back together, but at this moment, I kind of laugh, because I envisioned Humpty Dumpty, and I was like Humpty Dumpty. I fell off the wall and I couldn't put myself back together, and I was in a million pieces. And so I was praying two prayers to God consistently. The first prayer was, if you're real, you have to show up. You have to fix me, because this time I can't fix myself. I can't put myself back together. And when I tell you, I felt like I was in a million pieces, and I couldn't do it myself. I couldn't. And the other prayer was, and I always very openly say, this was the prayer that I wanted Him to answer. Please take my life. I'm done. Like, life is not worth living. I don't believe I signed up for this. Please just take my life. And I would say to Him, I want you to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to actually commit suicide, because I have two children, and I don't want my children to think that they weren't enough for me to push through, to make life worth living. Because it wasn't that. It was just that I felt like I just can't do life anymore. And so those were my two prayers. And I thought, looking back, that I had been pursuing Him. It was like 5 or 6 months that I was just like after Him. There was this hunger. It was insatiable inside of me to encounter Him. And so I thought that I had been pursuing Him. But as I look back, I realized that He had been pursuing me all my life. He was the one who had been pursuing me.
So what happens then? Yeah, I'm at the edge of my seat here. So, so how does He pursue you?
So He pursues me through everything. I was being touched. He was in that time that I thought I was pursuing Him, that I was literally just on the floor, puddles of tears, just emptying myself. I was emptying myself before Him, and He was circumcising my heart, and He was healing me, and He was breathing life into me, except I wasn't recognizing it, but I just knew that something was happening inside of me. And He became so necessary. He became like, I couldn't be without him. I couldn't be without talking to him. Like even worship music was all about just feeling his presence, experiencing his presence. And so I'm introduced to spiritual fasting. And in all of my searching, I'd never been told about spiritual fasting. And I said, hey, I'll do whatever it takes to have an encounter with God. So I'm introduced to spiritual fasting. After prayer, this person who talks to me about spiritual fasting, because I was looking for this breakthrough of this encounter with God. And he says to me, I want you to go to this house of prayer in Woodland Park, New Jersey. It's called a resting place. Everyone who goes there has some kind of encounter with God. So I'm like, I'm there. I'm doing it. And so I go on this 3-day fast. And the day of the end of the fast, everything that could go wrong went wrong. And I want to mention, and this is not to give the enemy a platform, but again, to expose him, because that's what I'm passionate about, to expose the work of the enemy. He was doing everything possible so that I would not get to that house of prayer, because he knew his time was up. And by the way, in those months, it was like 5 or 6 months from the first time I called out to God. I would have encounters at night, like sleep paralysis, demons coming into my room and telling me they were going to kill me. And I know some of your listeners might be like, what is she talking about? This is real. The spirit realm is real. There's light and there's darkness. There's God and there's Satan. And because I had opened so many doors along the way, inviting these demons, giving them authority in my life, they were saying to me, Satan was saying to me, oh, I'm not going to make this easy for you. Now you want to call on God. He knows that when we call on Jesus, Jesus will show up. So he knew his time was up, but he was in no way going to make it easy for me.
So the struggle is real. So this is a 5-month period of crying out to God, feeling spiritual torment, for lack of a better word. Yeah. And then a friend says, go on a 3-day fast. You go on a 3-day fast. You go to this prayer room in Woodland, New Jersey. What happens at the end of the prayer meeting? Or prayer
I
time?
go there. The prayer ministers that were supposed to be waiting for me were gone. And I went in and I just sat down, really just to take a break from how overwhelmed I was feeling, how defeated I was feeling. Like, this is crazy. And this voice says to me, go ask that man to pray with you. And, part of who I was not allowing people to see defeat. Like Sylvia always looked composed and everything was always good. I got this. And so I went over to that man and I told him, hey, I'm going through something really rough. And can you just pray with me? And he prayed with me. It turns out that it was Ali, the pastor of Resting Place. And he was so gracious. He prayed for me. And the entire time that he's praying, I'm like one eye open looking like, are the walls going to, burst? Is the ceiling going to open? Will God come down from the ceiling? Like, how's this going to happen? And that none of that happened. So I go, I leave, walk into my car in the parking lot, and I look up and I put my fist up, so to speak, and I said, you didn't show up. I said, I asked you, I gave you one opportunity to show up. Mind you, for the past 5 or 6 months, I'm feeling this draw inside of me. I need more of you. I need to know you. I need you, and I'm feeling this peace through reading his word, through worship, through worship music, through just even being on that floor with those puddles of tears. I'm feeling peace. I'm feeling like there's a washing going on inside of me. So I said to him, you didn't show up, but I'm not surprised, because when have you shown up for me in life? So I go home, watch a movie, fall asleep watching the movie. I wake up at 3:00 in the morning and Pat Robertson is on TV. And I'm thinking, well, that's not the movie channel I had on, but it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't care. And at this point, I'm giving up. Like, you didn't show up, God. And so now I'm just going to continue doing life without you. And now it's 4 o'clock in the morning. And my eyes were suddenly opened. So when I say that, I mean, I did not open my eyes. My eyes were suddenly opened. And I was speaking in a language that I didn't understand.
So
In addition,
this would be like the gift of praying in tongues.
yeah.
Okay.
Um,
So, and when you mean your eyes are
it,
open, are you awake? Are you like dreaming, but it's vivid? Or?
no. Well, now I'm awake because it was as if somebody came up to me and just like popped my eyelids open.
Okay.
So that's what happened. I'm now speaking in tongues. I'm not even aware that I'm speaking in tongues, but there's this force and this presence in my room, and it felt like the walls were going to burst. And my first thought was, God has finally had enough of me, enough of my mouth, and he sent Satan to kill me, to answer that second prayer that I would pray. Now, I want to point out the stronghold that the enemy had on my mind, that he had convinced me that God didn't love me, wasn't for me, that every bad thing that happened in my life, God orchestrated. He had convinced me of this so much so that I'm now saying God sent Satan to kill me.
That's the natural conclusion of your thinking.
That's the natural conclusion of my thinking. Like,
so you're telling me it wasn't Satan, the angel of death, trying to kill you?
It wasn't Satan. And as quickly as I had that thought, this voice from outside of me, as if I could hear him speaking into my ear, but it was big. It was literally like, it was like thunderous and powerful, but at the same time, overwhelming love says to me, you have nothing to fear. I am here. You have nothing to fear. I am here. And when I tell you, instantly, that fear that I was feeling went away. And I responded, Abba, is this you? The funny thing is, I had no idea what Abba meant.
It's not the Danish band. Okay.
It's, Abba is
father in Aramaic. Yeah.
Yeah. And my spirit, so that's like my spirit was responding, Abba, is this you? And I believe it's in Romans, right? That it says that we go from the spirit of, we're no longer orphans. We take on, sonship. We're adopted in, and our spirit calls out, Abba, Father.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. So I said, Abba, is this you? And he says, how could you think I don't love you? And how could you think I don't see you when I know every prayer you've prayed and every tear you've cried? And immediately there was like a projector in front of me. And it was me on that floor crying out to God, if you're real, I need you to show up. I need you to fix me. I need you to do something for me. And he showed me how throughout my life, he had been there. Every question that I had, even as a child, he instantly started answering. And then there were 3 really important things that happened. I had a face-to-face encounter with Jesus. I had felt such guilt over shortcomings as a mom, including the fact that, there was divorce and whatnot. Like, I felt like I failed my kids. And I never shared that with anybody. But, Jesus said to me, I'm so proud of you for the way that you have cared for these children that I entrusted onto you. Your children are in the palm of my hands. And what that spoke to me, what that showed me was that he would not allow me to live in that that lie, that shame, that condemnation, that guilt, not one more second. He immediately tore that lie down and spoke his truth over me. And that's just so beautiful and so amazing. He then took me before my mother in the spirit, and he said to me, "You must forgive." And I was prepared to present a case, like why I had the right to feel offended at whatever. And he looked at me because I said, "Well, that's a tall order, Lord." And he looked at me with this authority, but with this overwhelming love. And he said to me, "I'm not asking if you want to forgive. I'm telling you, you must forgive." And he said, "Because unforgiveness will keep you in bondage, daughter. And I have so much more for you than that." And in that instant, because everything was like in such an instant, the communication was telepathic and it was instant. He allowed me to feel his love for my mother, his compassion towards my mother, his love for me, his compassion for me. And I broke down crying and I said, "Lord, then help me forgive." And he certainly did. It took time in, bringing this, whatever it was, to him, and he helped me forgive. And he's, it was anything that needed to be restored in that relationship was restored. And then the other thing that he did was he took me before a friend of mine, a non-believer. And she was just diagnosed with cancer. And he put his right hand out, and from his right hand came this white ball. And I could tell that this white ball that was coming out of his hand, it was like fire. It was power. And he put his hand to her breast, and this light went through her entire body. And he said to me, "Tell her she is healed." And again, she was not a believer at the time. And he took time to go there to heal her. And do you know that from then on, never again have cancer cells been found in her body at all.
So you said Jesus shows up. You mean he like actually shows up, like physically shows up in your
Like
room?
physically, yes, like physically shows up.
Like
I
kind
have
of like
I have a face-to-face encounter with Jesus.
what does he look like? Is he
So there's a very bright light all around him. So I have shared that I can't really depict his features, his facial features. You can see the hair. He's wearing a white robe. He's got a gold sash around his waist, and I see the sandals. But more than what Jesus looked like was what I experienced in his presence. And the love was so overwhelming that it felt like my heart was going to explode.
like a
I've
positive?
never experienced a love like that.
Okay, so Jesus literally shows up, kind of like Paul of Damascus. There's a glow of light,
Yeah.
and Paul encounters Jesus in that kind of thing post ascension.
Yeah.
So then Jesus tells you three things. He shows you all the times you cried out to him, sort of like
Yeah. He shows me all the times that I was crying out to him, how he was there. But not only was he there in those times that I was crying out to him in like the last few months, he was there the entire time. Like that poem, Footprints in the Sand. And she's like, in my darkest moments, I only see one set of footprints in the sand. And he responds to her, "It was then that I carried you."
so.
And yeah, so he basically is showing me this, that throughout my entire life, he was there.
And then he tells you to forgive your mom.
He tells me to
He
forgive my
doesn't. He
mom.
doesn't. He like this is like in a commanding voice saying, you have to forgive your mom. This is not an option, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. In
So
fact,
on one end, there's a super lovey Jesus, and then on the other side is like, you got to listen to me.
well, the thing is, yeah, you got to listen to me. But there was not a one moment, even when he was telling me, when he said, you must forgive. And I said, well, I'm going to tell you why. I said, what I actually said was, that's a tall order, Lord. And I was ready to present my case. And he just looked at me. And when he looks at you, e- everything goes away,
Yep.
because it's a full expression of love in his eyes. And so, even though he said to me, I'm not asking if you want to forgive, I'm telling you, you must forgive. It was all I saw was love. Even in that way, that he, even though he was telling me, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, all I saw was love. And all I
And,
felt was love.
and then the third thing was he told you he healed. Was it breast cancer? It sounded like.
Yeah. I had a friend of mine who had just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And he took me before her in the spirit, and he put his right hand out. And that's when I saw this white ball that came out of his hand. And he put his hand like this. And when I saw that white ball, I could tell that it was like fire, like power that was coming from that white ball. And he put that hand on her breast, and that white light went throughout her entire body. And
and this person's not a Christian.
she wasn't a Christian then,
S-
and she wasn't, seeking then. But I always found it so interesting that she wasn't seeking, she wasn't a Christian. I was seeking, but yet he took the time to go to her. How, how amazing his
So,
grace, his mercy, his love is overwhelming. And this friend of mine, they have never ever again found any cancer cells in her body.
after that night, after that
Right.
moment.
That's right.
And then did she give her life to the Lord at that moment,
She gave,
or
not at that moment. A little while later, she gave her life to the Lord. But he did instruct me to share my testimony, and he gave me messages for my siblings, for her. And I was obedient. I shared with everyone what he asked me to share with them, and my testimony as well. And she was definitely touched by what I was telling her back then. And it took a couple of years later, but she ultimately did receive Jesus as her savior.
amazing, amazing. So then your answer to your question, if God is there, Jesus literally shows up. You literally hear an audible voice of the Father in heaven, and you feel like the Holy Spirit's now with you.
Hmm.
Yeah, after this dramatic conversion. But it
Yeah.
started with a prayer from a pastor. It started with the prayers of your brother and your grandmother. So it wasn't just necessarily um, a solo act. I think this is important because I think Paul, when he had his road to Damascus experience, there was the early church praying for him as an enemy. There was Stephen the martyr praying,
Yeah.
forgive them. He has no idea what he's doing.
Yeah.
Uh, going back to the sense of so much of us are in ignorance when it comes to the things of the Spirit or the things of Jesus Christ, for that matter.
Yeah.
So you had this dramatic experience. Jesus literally shows up in the room. Everything is changed at this moment, and everything is beautiful, and everything is tied up in a neat bow. Or you just begin this Christian discipleship journey now.
I began a discipleship journey, but my life was forever marked. Circumstances were the same, but my perspective and my heart was different. My life was forever marked, and everyone who saw me couldn't deny the fact that I had been in the presence of the Lord.
So
My
they noticed
life,
a tangible
my,
difference in how you were acting.
everything. Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I say the difference is. Mm, my heart was transformed. He transformed me from the inside out. And that was the thing. And that's what he does. He transforms us from the inside out. However we may have the encounter with him, when we have the encounter with him, whether it's through reading his word or however it is, we're having an encounter with love. And that love will transform. That love will transform. It did it for me, did it for Paul. Like that love will transform.
So, yeah, and that's the kind of the marker of if it's a positive spiritual encounter. Does it bear the fruit of the Spirit? Does it bear fruit? Does it point people to Jesus Christ? Does it transform the people, or is it just some sort of theatrics? So,
Right.
but there's a tangible difference. There was literally a healing that took place. There was an answer to your prayers, and that's quite an amazing testimony. So then this led you to eventually do a podcast and to go to Bible school eventually, or are you still?
Eventually, I started I continued discipleship, going to church, but going to church because it was an over and over presence and encounter, and just hearing the word, and just it's life. That's my life now. And so 3 years ago, he said to me, "You're going to have a podcast." And I immediately said, "Okay, Lord. Yeah, of course." And then I said, "Well, what's a podcast?"
Yeah.
What did I just agree to? And he took me back to the beginning, how edifying it was for me, that it helped build my faith to listen to all of these testimonies. And his direction was, you're going to have a podcast where the guests will share their testimonies. And this will help build faith, and this will breathe hope into a hopeless heart. And this will allow people to know that I'm real and that I'm good.
Amen to that. Yeah, I could speak from practical experience. When it seems like there's lack of faith in the room, or whatever to call it, testimonies and thanks are usually the key to invite more of the Spirit's presence, or to build faith in the room, to trust that God will provide the breakthrough. And that's a beautiful thing that you're doing with this podcast of collecting testimonies. And I'm grateful that you get to share your testimony on the Christ and Coffee podcast. And it's so good to just thank you for sharing your heart and your journeys. And God bless you on your ministry with the podcast, and let the testimonies collected edify and encourage the church to know that Jesus is indeed real.
Yes,
so thank you, Sylvia, for joining the program. Thank you for everyone watching online. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment below. Tune in next week for a brand new episode of the Christ and Coffee podcast. Much love and stay blessed.